always did in October, turning the sidewalks into rivers of orange and gold leaves that nobody bothered to sweep away. Emily Carter walked the same route to work every morning, past the same coffee shop, the same flower stand, and the same enormous billboard that towered over the intersection of 5th and Main. The billboard had been there for months now, advertising the new album from Nathaniel Hayes, the biggest pop star in the country. His face, 12 feet tall, looked down at the street with a practiced half-smile, the kind that made magazine covers sell out and made teenage girls faint at concerts. Emily wasn't a fan in that obsessive way. She just liked his voice, the way it cracked slightly, on the high notes in a manner that felt honest instead of polished. She had grown up with her mother playing his early songs in their small kitchen while they cooked dinner together, back before her mother got sick, back before everything changed. That particular Tuesday morning was her 25th birthday, and it was also the first birthday she would spend completely alone since her mother passed away 8 months earlier. Her friends had all sent messages. Her co-workers had left a small cupcake on her desk the day before, but there was a hollow feeling in her chest that no cupcake could fix. She stood at the crosswalk waiting for the light to change, staring up at that billboard, and something in her just broke a little. Without thinking, without caring who saw her, she stepped closer to the base of the structure where a maintenance ladder left a lower panel within reach, stood on her toes, and pressed a quick, silly, aching kiss to the printed image of his cheek. It was such a small, foolish thing, a moment of grief dressed up as a joke to herself. She laughed under her breath, embarrassed, and hurried across the street before the light changed, never noticing the black car parked just up the block, windows tinted, engine idling, with a very real and very tired Nathaniel Hayes sitting in the back seat, staring out the window because he could not sleep, and he had nowhere else to be before his morning interview. Nathaniel had seen thousands of fans do far more dramatic things than kiss a picture of his face. Girls screamed his name until they lost their voices. Some cried so hard security had to walk them out of venues. One had even tried to climb over a barricade in Chicago just to touch his sleeve. None of it moved him anymore. Fame had worn a strange callous over that part of him that used to feel, flattered by attention. But this was different somehow. This woman hadn't screamed. She hadn't taken out her phone to film it for content. She had looked, for just a second before she kissed the poster, unbearably sad, the way someone looks when they are missing something they can never get back. Then she had laughed at herself, a real laugh, private and unguarded, and walked away without a single glance behind her, without ever knowing anyone had watched. Nathaniel found himself asking his driver to slow down, to circle the block, but by the time they came back around, she was gone, swallowed into the current of pedestrians heading toward the office towers downtown. He could not explain, even to himself, why that 15-second moment stayed lodged in his mind the rest of the day. During his interview, when asked about his upcoming tour, he found his mind drifting back to her face. During soundcheck that evening, he caught himself humming a melody that didn't exist yet, something slower and sadder than anything on his new album. His manager noticed he was distracted and asked if something was wrong. Nathaniel said no, just tired, and left it at that, because how could he explain that he was haunted by a stranger who didn't even know he existed as a person, rather than a poster? He did something he had never done before. He asked his head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Marcus, who had worked with him for 6 years and had learned not to ask too many questions, to pull footage from the traffic camera near that intersection, just to see if he was imagining things, just to confirm this woman was real and not some fabrication of his exhausted mind. Marcus found her in less than a day. Her name was Emily Carter. She worked as a junior editor at a small publishing house 3 blocks from that intersection. She lived alone in an apartment above a laundromat. She had no criminal record, no unusual social media presence, nothing that suggested she was anything other than an ordinary young woman living an ordinary, quiet life. Nathaniel felt a flicker of guilt looking at the file Marcus handed him, as if he had trespassed into something private that wasn't his to see. He almost told Marcus to delete it and forget the whole thing. Almost. Instead, 3 days later, wearing a plain gray hoodie, a black bucket hat pulled low, and a face mask that hid most of his face, the same disguise he used whenever he wanted a single hour of being nobody, Nathaniel walked into the small grocery store 2 blocks from Emily's apartment. The one Marcus's research said she visited every evening after work. He told himself he only wanted to see her once up close, to satisfy his own curiosity and then let the whole strange fixation go. He did not expect to actually speak to her. He definitely did not expect what happened. Emily was standing in the produce aisle, comparing 2 bags of apples, with the kind of concentration usually reserved for far more important decisions, when a stranger in a bucket hat reached past her for a bag of oranges and knocked an entire display of canned soup onto the floor with his elbow. The clatter was enormous, cans rolling in every direction, and the stranger froze in what looked like genuine panic rather than embarrassment, as if he had never had to deal with the consequences of his own clumsiness before in his life. Emily, without hesitation, laughed and knelt down to help him gather the cans. Not because she recognized him, she didn't. The mask and hat did their job perfectly, but because it was simply the kind of person she was. They crouched there together, picking up cans of tomato soup and chicken noodle, bumping shoulders, apologizing to each other for no real reason. And by the time the aisle was tidy again, they were both laughing at nothing in particular. He introduced himself as Nate, just Nate, not Nathaniel, not the name printed in gold letters on album covers. Emily told him her name was Emily, and something about the ordinary rhythm of the conversation. 2 strangers who had just made a small mess and cleaned it up together felt more honest than any interaction Nathaniel Hayes had experienced in years. He asked if he could buy her a coffee as a thank you for the help. Half expecting her to say no, a woman alone shouldn't accept coffee from a masked stranger in a grocery store, and he would not have blamed her. But there are moments in life when 2 people simply recognize something safe in each other, without being able to explain why, and Emily said yes. They talked for 2 hours in a small coffee shop that stayed open late, and Nathaniel found himself telling her things he had never told any interviewer, any girlfriend, any so-called friend inside the industry. He told her, carefully avoiding any detail that might reveal who he really was, about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who wanted something from him, about how he sometimes felt like a product more than a person, about how he had begun to forget what his own laugh sounded like when it wasn't performed for a camera. Emily, in turn, told him about her mother, about the long nights in hospital rooms, about the guilt she still carried for not visiting. More in the final months, when work had felt wrongly more urgent than it truly was. She told him about the billboard and the kiss, blushing furiously as she admitted it, certain he would think she was ridiculous. Instead, Nate reached across the table and told her that grief makes people do strange, tender things and that there was nothing ridiculous about missing someone. So much you kiss a stranger's picture just to remember what love felt like. They began meeting again, always as Nate, always in small, unremarkable places where nobody looked twice at an ordinary couple sharing fries or walking through the park at dusk. For the first time in years, Nathaniel experienced weeks of his life that had nothing to do with charts or streaming, numbers or magazine covers. Emily experienced, for the first time since her mother's death, days that felt worth waking up for. Neither of them rushed to define what was happening between them, but anyone watching would have seen it plainly. The particular gentleness of 2 people falling in love without any performance at all. The truth came apart the way these things usually do, without warning and at the worst possible moment. Emily was scrolling through entertainment news on her lunch break when a headline caught her eye, an article about Nathaniel Hayes being spotted at a downtown coffee shop with an unidentified woman, a blurry photograph taken by someone who happened to recognize him despite the hat and mask on an evening he had let his guard down for just a moment too long. She stared at the photograph for a long time before she understood what she was looking at. That was her hand around that coffee cup. That was her laugh caught mid-motion. That was Nate, except the caption did not say Nate. It said Nathaniel Hayes, the singer whose face she had kissed on a billboard out of grief and loneliness months before, believing he would never know. Believing it meant nothing to anyone but her private sorrow, she felt something between betrayal and humiliation rise in her chest, hot and immediate. Every honest conversation they had shared suddenly felt suspect. Had he known about the billboard from the very beginning? Had this entire relationship been some elaborate joke, some strange experiment for a bored celebrity? A story he could someday tell at a party about the fan who kissed his poster and how he tracked her down to see how far the joke could go. She did not answer his calls that evening. She did not answer them the next day either. Nathaniel understood immediately. The moment his publicist showed him the article with an expression somewhere between panic and professional irritation, that Emily would see it and that she would misread everything. Because from the outside, without context, it looked exactly like the kind of manipulative stunt she would have every right to fear. He went to her apartment that same night. Disguise abandoned entirely, walking openly past the laundromat, and up the narrow stairwell with his heart pounding harder than it ever had before any stadium performance. He knocked, and when she opened the door, her eyes red-rimmed and her voice sharp with hurt. He did not try to charm his way out of it. He simply told her the truth, all of it, starting with the billboard and the traffic camera footage and the file Marcus had prepared, admitting that yes, he had gone looking for her. That the beginning of their story had started with something that could reasonably look like an invasion of her privacy, and he would understand completely if she never wanted to see him again for that reason alone. But he also told her that everything after that grocery store aisle had been real in a way. Nothing in his life had been real for a very long time. That the version of himself she knew as Nate, quiet, clumsy, unguarded, was not a performance at all, but the truest version of him that fame had slowly buried under years of managed appearances. He told her he understood if trust once cracked this way could not simply be repaired with an apology, and that he had not come to demand forgiveness, only to make sure she heard the truth from him, rather than from a headline written by someone who had never met either of them. Emily stood in her doorway for a long moment, arms crossed, the cold autumn air pushing in from the stairwell behind him. She thought of her mother, who used to say that the bravest thing a person could do was tell the truth, even when the truth made them look foolish, especially then. She thought of the billboard, the kiss meant for no one, the coffee shop where two strangers had built something honest between piles of spilled soup cans. She thought about how frightened she felt now, and how that fear was really just proof of how much she had let herself care. She did not forgive him that night, not fully, not with words, but she stepped aside from the doorway and let him in, and they sat together on her small couch and talked until well past midnight. Carefully, honestly, working through every uncomfortable detail neither of them wanted to leave unspoken. It took weeks, not days, for the trust between them to rebuild itself into something sturdier than it had been before, precisely because it had been tested and had not shattered completely. Months later, when the story of how they met eventually became public, not through a leaked photograph but through their own choice to share it, people found it almost impossible to believe that it had started with an act of grief, a kiss offered to a printed image on her worst birthday, witnessed by chance from the back seat of a car. Nathaniel would later say in an interview, without hiding behind performance this time, that the billboard version of him had been an illusion, built by a marketing team. But the man Emily met in that grocery store aisle, clumsy with the oranges and startled by falling soup cans, was the only version of himself he had ever wanted someone to fall in love with. Emily, for her part, kept a single framed photograph in their shared apartment, not of the two of them together, but of that anonymous billboard on 5th and Main, long since replaced by a new advertisement, a quiet reminder of the strange and careless kiss that had somehow, impossibly found its way back to her as real love.